Welcome to False Flag, the podcast made to cut through the propaganda and doublespeak and empower a grassroots activism, and most importantly, to take back a government of and for the people.
Thanks for joining us on False Flag. Today we're going to be talking about media, and where this came from is, first of all, a lot of people don't know this about myself, that I spent close to 15 years in the media business, both as a writer, producer, on-air personality in all genres, from magazines to newspapers to radio and TV. So I kind of understand media, but a friend of mine recently made the comment on how negative the news is and how it just really depresses her. And I made the comment to her. I said, why are you even watching mainstream media? Because mainstream media is a editorialized piece based upon the shareholders of that corporation. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, don't you realize that 6 conglomerates own 90% of all media? And she said, what are you talking about? I said, 6 companies own 90% of what we watch, both in television, read in newspapers, in magazines, television shows, movie studios. All that is owned by 6 international conglomerates. So 90% of what we do as far as getting information is from 6 different sources. And I beg to differ, there's a whole much better press out there. That's why I read magazines like In These Times. I also read Yes Magazine. I read Monthly Review. But look at how media, and I want this show to be about how media has influenced our life so much. I mean, Billy, talk to us a little bit about the movie that we watched about how my dad was brainwashed.
Was that the name of it? Good title there. That movie was focused on a real family, and I think there was a father who was retirement age, probably 70 or 75, older gentleman. And I think a daughter. He had, I think, more than one child, but this one particular daughter was closer to him and interacted with him a lot. And she noticed that her father went to being like a normal person, with good intentions, mainly, and kind and generous, and just kind of a nice guy, to being a kind of an old crabby guy that was really unhappy and complained about everything all the time. And had some strong opinions, real biased.
Well, he went from being a Democrat to being a staunch Republican, and he was Fox News and the onset of radio talk shows.
Yeah.
And where did that all originate from? Remember, the movie traced it back to Nixon. Remember, there was
where they did away with the fairness principle or whatever that was.
That didn't happen until Reagan's administration. Okay. But how the Republican Party knew that it was going to be through media that they could disengage so many Democrats getting involved if they started funneling their money and their look at media. And this is why people like Rush Limbaugh and different people got involved in talk show radio. It was a move by the Republican Party to take control of the media.
Right. And I guess it culminated in Fox. But yeah, it started decades ago in the 70s. And it was... You mentioned there were Republican parties, but I think it goes further than that into what they called neocons. Back then, there was a thing called PNAC, the Project for a New American Century or something. And so back in the 80s or 90s, these conservative people got together and figured out how, well, basically they were going to control the world, you know. And so they knew.
What are we going to
then,
do tonight? Try to take over the world.
Yeah, and that's no joke, because they published this white paper. They published, it's a published report, and it spelled out their plans on how they were going to do it. And part of that was to take over, control the media. And so that's what they did.
What I found interesting was in this movie called How My Dad Was Brainwashed, was the correlation that the ultra-conservatives, back in the day, we knew them as the John Birch Society members. And we even had legislators in Washington that were part of the John Birch Society, and we knew they were ultra-conservative and had an alternative agenda. Mm-hmm. And those people evolved into a new term that they called Tea Party. So the Tea Party people had the mindset, and we go back to what we talked about in the previous episode about libertarians and their mindsets. All those come out of the Tea Party. Mm-hmm. So you're going back into a genealogical line that feeds back into the John Birch Society. Yeah, and so, but I remember the Fairness Doctrine. The Fairness Doctrine was enacted by the Federal Communication Commission, better known as the FCC, in 1949, and it required that broadcast licensees, that if they presented controversial issues to the public, they had to do it in a way that the other side had the same amount of time given to them.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh never would have happened if that was the case.
Yeah.
That's how they all sprung up, as they got rid of that.
And I was working in radio when that got repealed under Reagan's administration. And what it also did was it allowed corporations to own, because the FCC up to that point, licensees, you couldn't have a conglomerate owning outlets in Atlanta, New York, Texas, and all that. It opened the door to allow these conglomerates that happen, which gets back to how 6 major international companies own 90% of the media. Yeah. Now, why is that important? Well, their agenda is going to be what they talk about, which means the movies, the television shows. So all this stuff that you're listening to is becoming a part of you. So if that's all you're absorbing, then yeah, that will equate to some of the lack of interest that many people have today and why they're not involved, because they're quieted down. When you disengage from mainstream media, it's like detoxifying your body.
And in that movie, that was brought out clearly that the guy was getting all mean and crabby and all, and intolerant of any little difference from him. And the lady,
reprogrammed
he reprogrammed the remote or something.
Yeah, the remote where he could not get the Fox channel anymore.
Yeah, and he just quit listening to Fox, and there might have been a radio program, Limbaugh or something, where he just, he was watching other news programs, and he went back to his old self in no time.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about how they're, getting to extreme. Every Republican that I know, every Republican that I've talked to since the body slamming Congress or representative in Montana, everyone says, "Oh, that guy deserved it. He should have been bugging that representative." It's like, how do you go from, maybe one person was a little bit more rude, or you just don't body slam people because they ask you questions.
That's kind of like against the law to me. If I did that, I would be charged with a crime.
He's not like being belligerent with him. He just get out of my yard, kids.
Yeah, I body slammed the reporter. Well, number one, media does shape our lives. It tells us what products we need to buy and the quantity and nature of coverage, what is important and what is unimportant. Media informs us. And even Bernie Sanders.
Give us models. I mean, even the sitcoms and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Models on the way like how life is supposed to be.
TV. Oh man, I'm an old guy, and I remember those old family shows back from the '50s. Ozzie and Harriet, and Leave It to Beaver, and all that. And the wife was doing the vacuum cleaner, and heels and her pearls.
Remember when Satan had the first little gay character?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, that was an abomination.
Yeah.
And now, I watch ABC and NBC and all that. But in most of them,
I was a teenager from that. Yeah, it was a shock.
But so TV and movies are a strong influence on our society. Strong influence. They tell us how to behave and what to think.
Well, Bernie Sanders had an article in the magazine in these times. It came out January 26th of this year, 2017, and he has an essay in there on how corporate media threatens our democracy. So when you understand that 6 companies own 90% of all media, you can thank Reagan, who had the backing of the corporation. Our previous podcast was on how corporations dictate legislation by using their money. FCC deregulated and got rid of the fairness doctrine. And it was a trickle-down effect that what happened was you had all these corporations that came together and they grew and grew and grew. And that's why it's important to even realize that when Time Warner is trying to be bought by AOL, who owns AOL, what share do they play? It gets broader and broader.
Well, what's the company that owns Clear Channel Communication?
Yeah.
This is probably 10 years ago. I'm clicking through the local stations on the radio.
It's all Clear Channel.
And I song, so click over another preset, same song, but just a little bit different.
The time is a little off. Yeah.
I was like, well, okay, whatever. And the announcer comes on. I was like, I know this guy. Click over the other thing. It's the same guy. 15 seconds difference. Yeah, they're doing exactly the same content on 2 different stations.
Sure.
And then the local Rock 100. They still local. You call the DJ and request songs. It's all typed in now.
Oh yeah, and it's it's all pre-done. I have a friend of mine who works for a national company. I won't say which one, but I remember in 5th grade, him and I studied together to get our FCC license, because back then you could be 10 years of age. You'd go down to Dallas and take the test on engineering and get an FCC license, But he goes in twice a month and records for 3 or 4 hours each time. And the computer then matches his voice to the songs and everything. And it's not like when I used to be in the studio and people would call me up, can you put this on? Yeah, let me grab it. And within 15 minutes, it was on the air. Everything was pre-tried. But you go back to what you were talking about earlier, that's called Power 90 rotation. And that came out of the payola scandal of radio, because psychologists found out that if you hear the same song every 90 minutes, Power 90 rotation, that within a 2-week period, that is so embedded in your mind, you'll go out and buy the album. And that's where payola came in, because record companies would pay the radio stations to throw certain songs onto Power 90 rotation. Let me back up a few years later, when I was in my early 20s, and my best friend's brother joined a supergroup. Okay, and they were getting ready to come out with their first album. They're in the studio, and Warner Brothers was behind them. And I was talking to him in November, and I worked at a record store then. And I said, man, I can't wait to get your album. Do you know when it ships? And he said, yeah, it's going to ship in April, and it's going to appear as number 60 the first week on Billboard Records, and the next week it's going to move up to 38.
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, what? This is November. It's not coming out till April, and he already knows where it's going to be on Billboard. Billboard is used by how many products are being sold in that. So if Warner Brothers is backing a band and wants it to move up the charts, they'll get in touch with Sam Goody, Walmart, and say, hey, we got a band, we're going to put a lot of promotion, they're going to be on Farm Aid, we're going to put them in front of the TV, how many units will you buy? And they'll get all that worked out a year in advance. And so they already know what it's going to appear on Billboard when the album comes out, because they already have those units sold, but not to the public.
Okay, Ted Cruz got in trouble with this last election cycle. He released his, basically election book. It shot straight to New York Times bestseller list, and boy, it was. They started looking at his campaign had bought like 40,000 units like every 2 days. They'd buy 40,000 units of the book just to bump it up that thing. Because when it gets to a certain point, there's clubs that will send out, whatever New York Times bestseller, then they'll start pushing it,
Yeah. And then you'll see excerpts in Reader's Digest that goes back into the media conglomerates that own part of the publishing company.
A rollout.
Okay, so media controls us. We've got to quit getting our news from mainstream media because they're only force feeding us what they want. If you want to know the good truth, then watch shows like Democracy Now!, read magazines like In These Times. Let's talk about an older newspaper that's a magazine now called The Nation.
I remember that, yeah.
Okay? We have publications out there that are more left-wing, left-minded, because they're not part of the 6 media conglomerates that own 90% of the media.
I brought this up last couple podcasts or whatever, a few podcasts ago. I read a terrifying book. It's called Trust Me, I'm Lying. I recommend it. It goes through this guy, how you can put a fake news story out there by you can write a blog. Reference it in your Twitter. You have friends that on other blogs that will reference that, and by upselling.
You are your own reference.
Yeah, you're your own reference.
That's where the news.
And then when it gets to this particular blog, then Breitbart comes in there and picks it up.
Then it takes off and it's news.
It's news, yeah.
And you could have written anything.
You could have wrote anything you want. Yes.
If somebody checks back, you're the
reference. So, yeah, and you're the author, the reference, and the checker.
Yeah.
And then that's where we're at. We don't since we don't have a subscription based model for news anymore. It's all clickbait, and so they don't care. The business side of it doesn't care if it's true or well thought out. They want you to click on that page to see that ad for water filters.
Yeah.
And if they can get you to do that, their job is done. And I ran into a story the other day. It was there's a country singer, I think Miranda Lambert or something like that from here. I'm not. She's a great singer, but I'm not. It's like I own albums or anything. But I saw a thing on her like Miranda Lambert shares too much with her fans and pays the price. And like, well, that's. It was like one of the main stories. I'm like, well, I wonder what she did. So I click on the story. And it's like a 2 or 3 paragraph story talking about how she went to an award ceremony and everything was fine and she thanked everybody. And the headline had nothing to do with the story.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what? But again, I saw the ad. I clicked on it, yeah.
We're going to talk more about this in the next podcast. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this one. But part 2 of the media will be next week. So join us next week as we...
Let me throw one. It's an older one. It's about the Bush election and how Rudolph Murdoch destroyed the news. Watch that one.
Okay, so we'll see you next week as we go into part 2 of the media.
Thank you for tuning into False Flag, the grassroots activism podcast where together we can change the world. Please like, comment, and subscribe.